hand, last week at City Council, I successfully moved that City Council send 3 items back to City staff for more work. With all 3 items, city staff were recommending lane and sidewalk closures in the downtown core for purposes of facilitating private development, usually new residential condominiums. The recommendations would have allowed these latest condo developments to erect construction staging areas on public roadways and sidewalks. 2 of the closures, one on Richmond and the other on Bathurst right behind me here, proposed closing a lane of traffic for 2 years, 2 entire years. The third one, also on Richmond Street to the east, proposed a lane closure for 3 years. 3 years. It doesn't matter how you get around the city, whether you are a pedestrian, a cyclist, a transit user, or a driver, you would be affected by these closures for a very long period of time. In fact, for an unacceptably long period of time. And I drew a line at this council meeting where I held these 3 items because I wanted to register the fact that it is time we started to place a much greater emphasis on the broader public interest when it comes to these kinds of decisions. So we did the right thing at council last week, but it's just a beginning. First, the good news with a serious point attached to it. The fact that I held the proposed closure here at Bathurst and Front up at council, together with the efforts of Councillor Cressy and the developer working together, allowed us to modify their request and significantly reduce the disruption. So what you can see behind me here is now they're closing only a small part of the curb lane, but it will still allow 2 lanes of traffic to be operating in this area, whereas the original proposal for a period of years would have allowed only 1 lane of traffic shared with a streetcar to move by this place. And you can imagine the kind of bottleneck that would have created. But thanks to the efforts after the hold that I put on it of the developer and Councillor Cressy and the city staff, we have worked something out. The serious point coming out of all of that, it can be done. Council voted unanimously to send the other 2 closures back to our city staff and direct that they work with developers to come up with a better way to stage their tools and vehicles instead of closing a lane of traffic and sidewalks for construction for years on end, which of course has the effect of increasing congestion in the city and disrupting the residents of Toronto, including cyclists and pedestrians. So they'll be reporting back in a month on how these projects might use different means to either shorten or eliminate the closure of lanes, which also impact on sidewalks and on cyclists. Now, I should point out to you that notwithstanding what happened at City Council last week at the Richmond Street West address, and we're not exactly sure of the circumstances that led to this in terms of the interaction with our city staff, the hoarding already went up, closing down a portion of the lane of traffic. And we'll have to make sure of what happened there in terms of what city staff may have said could or should be done before council approval. But I want it to be understood very clearly by the people inside the City Hall and outside the City Hall that the council approval of these kinds of things going forward is not going to be a rubber stamp. It never should have been, but now we've established the precedent, and we will be going forward looking at each of these very carefully, and we'll be making sure people understand that approval is not given until approval is given. And in this case, as I say, I'm not happy about the fact that the hoarding went up when, in fact, council did not give the approval. I will point out something that I've mentioned before, which is that other major cities like New York don't allow developers to close a lane of traffic because it is too disruptive for the orderly functioning of the city. And I think we have to head in the same direction so that no closure or very short closures become the rule rather than the exception. Since I took office, I've been committed to getting Toronto moving because I know people want to be on time for work or for school or just to get home sooner to their families at the end of the day. At my direct urging and my initiative, since I took office, we introduced, with council approval, stricter criteria and much higher fees for developers who want to close lanes of traffic or sidewalks for construction. Previously, developers only had to pay $5.77 per square meter per month to close a lane of traffic. Now, after the increase that I initiated, the fees range between $26.35 to $105.41 per square meter per month. And the reason for those higher fees was to encourage builders to take up a lane of traffic for less time or to look for ways to avoid it altogether. But clearly, in the case of the 3 items in council last week, the message is not being received. and the fees still seem to represent nothing more than a cost of doing business. I had intended for those changes to make more of a difference, and since that doesn't seem yet to be the case, we will get together and force developers to be more resourceful and considerate. The people of Toronto are sick of congestion, and a big factor in that, as much as we welcome the investment and confidence in our city, is construction by private developers, and we simply have to do better. The city is doing more on its own projects, such as moving to 24/7 construction and investing more money to get jobs done faster so as to minimize disruption. Now we will start with these individual projects, the three that were held at Council last week, one of which seems to have been resolved in a manner that is satisfactory. We will see how much better we can make the other two and send a strong signal within City Hall and to developers that it is not business as usual anymore when it comes to closing lanes of traffic and sidewalks for private construction. As part of the same policy change, I will be formally requesting city staff to scan policies and practices in place in other major cities, examine available construction technology, and look at planning considerations involved in making these kinds of lengthy closures a virtual thing of the past. I tried the financial carrot, and the results just aren't good enough, and so now we will have to use a bit of the regulatory stick, hopefully combined with some approaches that work in other cities and some private sector ingenuity. The objective is a win-win. We get the new buildings, which show such confidence in a growing city, at the same time as pedestrians and cyclists and drivers can still get around that very same city. That is our objective, because the status quo is not satisfactory. It is not going to be business as usual going forward, and I hope that the steps taken, the very initial steps taken at City Council last week to say we're not satisfied to two proposed lengthy lane and sidewalk closures will send a strong signal inside City Hall and to the development community and to the people of Toronto that business as usual is not going to prevail, that we're going to do better because we have to. Your questions.
Mr. Mayor, does this open the City of Toronto up to any potential litigation with contracts that were in place for these kind of construction projects?
No, I mean, because at the end of the day, the closure of a lane is not approved until it's approved. And in this case, at my specific initiative, the holds were put on last week and there were not approvals given. We did subsequently approve this one because the developer, in a public-spirited move, working with the city, modified it such that it's not going to block a lane of traffic. And that's exactly what we want to see done everywhere we can. It's a big challenge for us because there are a lot of private condominium construction projects and other kinds of projects, and I really had hoped that by increasing the fees quite dramatically, as you heard from the numbers, that this would dampen down the number of people who even ask to close a lane, let alone the length of time that they would close it for. And it doesn't seem to be working as well as I had hoped, and so now is the time to say fine, then we're going to take steps to make sure you understand this is not a rubber stamp, that we're going to be discouraging these, and if we have to look at the fees again, we will. But the bottom line is that there are far too many of these instances across the city. These just happen to be the three that came to council last week, and frankly, I was fed up, and I just decided we had to do something about it, and the first step was to say, no, we're not just going along with this, we're going to find other ways to make it better. Well, the timetable has not changed. It's still going to be about the same period of time. I should tell you that the actual permissions are granted in 6-month increments, and while you don't have to go back to council, the permits are 6 months long, and in this case they had estimated it would be 6 months times 4. So I'm not sure the period of time has changed here, but what has changed is you now have 2 lanes of traffic continuing to go by here for the duration of whatever the time is, whereas under the original proposal you would have had one whole lane, one entire lane of traffic closed down and only one lane left shared with a streetcar. And that is just not satisfactory. And I'm very happy at the fact that the developer in this case, working with the city and Councillor Cressy and others, because I held it, came forward themselves and said, we can do better than this, and they did. And so I think it's a big improvement.
Is there a mechanism in the city to sort of check out that as the project goes along and say, at some point we don't believe this?
this is one of the things we're going to look at going forward, because I had hoped the money would do that. I hoped that they would be saying, look, we could be saving huge amounts of money by getting this done a lot faster and having the lane reopened again. It appears not to be the case. And so if money doesn't talk, then the regulatory stick will be used, and we will have to find ways perhaps to be more persistent in saying, well, no, you get 6 months and that's it. So you get your work done that requires a lane closed in the 6 months, not 2 years. Because I think a lot of people have also complained to me that they will see these lanes closed, and the sidewalks, by the way, and that has impacts on the bike lanes. They'll see it closed, and there's no apparent reason for it after a period of time. There aren't a lot of trucks coming and going, and this kind of thing. So this is why we have to do better, and I'm very determined that we are not going to put the public interest a poor second to the interests of people who have projects as important as they may be to the lifeblood of the city.
Mayor Tory, any concerns that tightening the regulations and raising the fees and all that kind of stuff would potentially make developers think twice about trying to build something here as long term?
Well, I want the city to be healthy in all respects. I want the city to have healthy development going on. It seems to be right now we're not having any trouble attracting people to invest in the city, and you can't take that for granted. But at the same time, we have a city to live in here while these people are doing their business, and they're making a profit doing it, and I'm happy about that. But they have to understand there is a public interest to be protected here, and it's my job to do that. And so I hope the balance that we achieve with reasonable fees and reasonable regulations that protect the public interest will not affect people's decisions to do business in the city. But the bottom line is the public interest always has to be placed first. I would love an instance where, quite frankly, we didn't have any of these kinds of lane closures happen ever, and that our policy was, except in very exceptional cases, you don't close a lane or a sidewalk. There are instances where the land configuration is going to make it difficult for that, but I think we're going to move much more to an intensive, carefully reviewed, case-by-case basis. We will have to review the fees, and if they should be even higher to make sure we discourage lengthy road closures, we will take a look at that, and we're going to take a look at the policies of other cities and the construction technology practices that exist elsewhere that seem to have some other cities able not to have these lane closures and sidewalk closures. So I think there's going to be quite a big change, but it starts with the attitude of both city staff and the developers to say we're going to work much harder than we have in the past to make sure these closures are either not happening at all or that they are much shorter when they do happen.
Does the rubber more questions?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, and I've never asked the question, but I think it just goes into the general revenues of the city. So I'm not aware it goes anywhere else, like to any other special fund.
Can you speak to the construction project west of College? Contractor issues between
Well, the bottom line is it's a joint venture, as you know, between the business improvement area and the city, and it is not satisfactory the way it has gone along. Parts of it were happening not too badly at first, and then things started to happen that were in breach of the contract. And so the city has now taken steps in order to minimize the disruption that is being caused to business and to people trying to walk around or get around the city, to minimize that, quite frankly, and perhaps start afresh to get this job done. And the bottom line is we're going to get the job done. In our view, the contractor has breached the contract, and we will be, defending ourselves against any claim to the contrary. And we've got to continue to work at doing better on these things. But in this case, it's one of those things where we've had other incidents involving this contractor, and I think that's to be taken into account by us as well. I think when you have these kinds of personnel matters, and that obviously restricts my ability to talk in detail about what's happened here. There are laws, as you know, that preclude intimate discussion of personnel details. But once you have to sort of figure out what the problem is, and then you have to address it. And I will only say to you that I think our city staff, who handled this without any political involvement whatsoever, did a very good job of handling a situation that presented itself. And things didn't work out. And now the fire chief has left the public service. And that's as much as I can really say. Which target? Immigration has been the lifeblood of the growth and the dynamism of this city, and wave after wave of immigrants going back 50 or 60 years, in fact going back the entire life of this country, are what has built Toronto, and I'm confident that the federal government is going to be prudent in setting targets, but you don't hear much concern coming from me. I mean, frankly, to fill the jobs that are being created here, there are very smart people coming to this country, and I think we should continue to have them come, and that the government will exercise the appropriate steps to make sure that we're, taking the people that we want to have and that we need. Well, I think that's a judgment they can make based on calculations that I'm not privy to, but I certainly think that in this particular neck of the woods here in Toronto, we have a growing economy, we have a city that we want to keep growing, and that we have benefited